The wind never rested in Red Mesa Valley. It came roaring out of the canyon each afternoon, carrying with it the scent of dust, sage, and loneliness. Eli Turner, owner of the last working ranch for 50 miles, was used to that silence that followed the wind, the kind that made a man talk to his horse more than to people. By late morning the sun was already cruel. Eli set his shovel against the corral fence and stretched his sore back. The cattle lowed lazily in the distance, shadows wobbling on the cracked earth. He had lived through 5 dry seasons, 2 locust summers, and 1 bad heartbreak, and somehow still woke up each dawn to fight another day. He was halfway to the barn when he noticed a thin cloud of dust on the horizon, low, uneven, too slow for a wagon and too heavy for tumbleweed. Someone was out there, walking. Eli squinted, shading his eyes. No rider would cross that stretch on foot, unless they were desperate. He grabbed his hat, swung onto his horse, and rode out. The figure ahead staggered, then fell to her knees. As Eli drew closer, he saw she was a young woman, hatless, sunburned, and dressed in travel-worn calico. Her hair hung loose and dusty over her shoulders. She looked as if she'd been walking for days. "Miss," he called out. She turned her head but didn't answer. When he reached her, she collapsed face-first into the dirt. Eli jumped down, kneeling beside her. "Hey now, you're all right. You hear me?" Her lips were parched. "It's swelling fast," she whispered. He looked where her hand pressed against her side. The fabric was torn and dark with blood. He peeled it back carefully. A long gash ran along her upper thigh, red and angry, rimmed with dust. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. "You've got yourself a nasty one." Her eyelids fluttered. "Please, don't let it take me." "You're not dying on my land," he said, lifting her into his arms. She was featherlight. His horse stamped and whinnied, feeling his urgency as he swung her up and climbed behind. The ride back was a blur of sun and sweat. She drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling something about a wagon raid, about men in black scarves, and a lost brother. Eli didn't press her. The first job was keeping her alive. The cabin smelled of leather and smoke, the scent of solitude. Eli kicked the door open and carried her to his bed, the only decent piece of furniture he owned. He set her down gently and fetched a basin of water, a roll of clean bandages, and an old bottle of whiskey. When he came back, she was trembling. "Don't," she murmured. "I ain't gonna hurt you, ma'am," he said softly. "But you've got fever. Infection's already setting in." Her breathing hitched. She nodded faintly. He unbuttoned the torn edge of her dress enough to reach the wound, then hesitated, out of respect more than fear. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I'll be quick." He poured the whiskey over the wound. She gasped, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes shot open, wild with pain, but he kept his hand steady, washing away the dirt and dried blood. He tore a strip from an old undershirt and pressed it over the cut until the bleeding slowed. "You're lucky," he muttered, more to himself. "A little deeper, and that knife would have ended you." When he finished bandaging, he sat back, heart pounding harder than any gunfight he'd ever been in. He had seen wounds before, in the war, on the trail, but never on someone so fragile, so human. Helping her felt like trespassing on something sacred. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. The ranch dog barked once, then fell silent. Eli poured a cup of water and held it to her lips. "Small sips," he said. "You need it." She obeyed, then fell back against the pillow, exhausted. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Mills." "Well, Miss Mills, you're safe here." He stood and adjusted the lantern wick, dimming the light. "Rest easy. You'll be all right come morning." The night stretched long. Eli sat at the table, listening to the tick of the wall clock and the occasional moan from the bed. Fevered dreams, mostly, fragments about her brother, about gunfire, about a stolen wagon of supplies. He caught only pieces, but one word repeated: bandits. He'd seen enough trouble to know she wasn't lying. There were men out there who'd rob travelers blind and leave them bleeding by the road. Maybe she'd been lucky enough to crawl away. When dawn came, light spilled across the floorboards, painting the room gold. Eli rose from his chair, stiff from the night's vigil, and went to check on her. Her breathing was steadier. The swelling around the bandage had gone down a little. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. When she opened her eyes, she looked around the small cabin in confusion. Where am I?" "My ranch," he said. "Red Mesa. You were half dead when I found you." She tried to sit up but winced. "The other's my brother." "Don't move yet," he interrupted gently. You lost a lot of blood. We'll talk when you've got some strength back. She stared at him, really looked at him, for the first time. He was rough-hewn, with sun-creased skin, a weak stubble, and eyes the color of weathered wood. There was something in those eyes that made her feel, strangely, safe. "Why would you help me?" she asked quietly. He shrugged. Would have been wrong not to. That simple answer seemed to move her more than any fancy words could have. She turned her face toward the window, blinking hard. "Thank you." He nodded once. "Get some rest. I'll bring you broth when the fire's up." That afternoon, while Eli mended a fence, he kept glancing toward the cabin window. He didn't understand why. Maybe it was because he hadn't heard a woman's voice in his house since his mother died. Maybe it was because when Clara had looked at him, it had been with the kind of trust that could break a man if he wasn't careful. When he came back inside, she was awake again, sitting up slightly. The color had returned to her cheeks. "You're stubborn," he said with a half-smile. "Most folks would still be asleep. I didn't want to be a burden." "You're not. You're company." He handed her a bowl of soup, steaming from the fire. "Careful, it's hot." She took it with trembling hands. "You live out here alone?" "Me and the cattle," he said, "and a dog who thinks he owns the place." Her smile was faint but real. "Sounds peaceful." "It's quiet," he admitted. "Sometimes too quiet." She sipped slowly, her eyes roaming the small room, the rifle on the wall, the worn Bible on the shelf, the hat hanging by the door. "You were a soldier," she said, nodding toward the folded uniform jacket above the hearth. "Once. A long time ago." He didn't say more, and she didn't ask. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was gentle, like two weary souls learning to breathe the same air again. When evening came, Eli checked her wound once more. "It's healing," he said. "Still swollen, but not angry like before." She nodded, trying not to blush as he retied the bandage with careful, impersonal hands. "I owe you my life," she murmured. He looked at her for a moment, then shook his head. "Just doing what anyone decent would do." "Not everyone would have stopped," she said softly. Eli didn't answer. He adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, then stepped back toward the door. "Get some sleep, Clara. Tomorrow we'll see about finding your brother." She watched him a long moment after he left, listening to the door click shut. Outside, she could hear him whistling low to his horse, the notes drifting through the night air. It was the loneliest sound she'd ever heard, and somehow the kindest. As the stars came out above the desert plain, Clara closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Mr. Turner." He didn't hear her, but he would, soon enough, because by the time the sun rose again, both their lives would be bound together in ways neither could have imagined. 3 days passed before Clara could stand on her own. Each morning, Eli fed the cattle and then came inside with the same quiet routine: hot water, a wooden tray, a few kind words. The first time she managed to walk to the porch, she stopped short, staring at the sweep of the valley below, a sea of gold grass, rimmed by red cliffs and a sky so wide it made her dizzy. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Eli set down a bucket beside the steps. "Took me years to see it that way again," he said. "When you live here long enough, you start noticing what's missing instead of what's there." "What's missing?" He hesitated. "People, mostly." Clara looked at him then, really looked. Beneath the rugged calm was a man carved by solitude. His kindness had been quiet, almost shy, and she sensed he didn't offer it often. That afternoon a windstorm rolled through. Eli hurried the horses into the barn, while Clara closed shutters against the dust. When he came back inside, his hat was thick with sand, and his shirt clung to his back. She handed him a cloth, without a word. He smiled faintly. "You're turning into a ranch hand already." She laughed, a sound so light it startled both of them. The storm howled outside, but inside the cabin was warm. They shared cornbread and beans by lamplight, the flicker painting soft shadows across the walls. For the first time since her injury, Clara told him what had happened. She and her brother Daniel had been hauling a wagon of supplies westward when a gang ambushed them near the canyon. Daniel fought back. She didn't know if he'd survived. She'd run until her leg gave out. Eli listened in silence, jaw tight. "There's been talk of those men," he said. "If your brother's alive, we'll find him." She touched the edge of his sleeve. "You've done enough already." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. A person deserves to know." Something in his voice, firm, protective, almost tender, made her chest ache in a new way. The next morning he saddled 2 horses. Clara's wound was still healing, but she insisted on riding with him. They followed wagon tracks into the canyon until they found the burned remains of a campfire and a scattering of spent shells. Beside them lay a small brass button. Clara knelt, brushing dirt from it. "It's Daniel's." From his coat. Eli dismounted, scanning the horizon. Then he got away. These tracks head north toward the river. They followed until sundown, then made camp beneath a cottonwood. The air smelled of dust and river water. Eli built a small fire, careful to shield it from the wind. Clara sat across from him, watching the flames dance. "You've risked so much for me," she said softly. "Why?" He poked at the fire with a stick. "Because once someone risked the same for me. I never got to pay it back." She waited, sensing the weight behind his words. "Was it the war?" He nodded. "I was shot outside Fort Donovan. My partner dragged me through 2 miles of gunfire. He didn't make it. After that, I figured if I ever had the chance to save someone, I wouldn't hesitate." The wind rustled through the grass. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Clara said, "Maybe that's why I ended up here, so you could keep your promise." Eli looked up, eyes meeting hers through the firelight. The space between them seemed to hum. He cleared his throat and looked away first. "We should rest. We ride at dawn." They found Daniel 2 days later, alive but wounded, camped near the riverbank with a band of travelers who'd taken him in. The reunion was fierce and tearful. Clara clung to her brother's neck while Eli stood back, smiling quietly. When Daniel thanked him, Eli only said, "You can repay me by keeping her safe." But that night, as they prepared to part ways, Clara came to him. "You could come with us," she said. "There's work near Silverton. A man like you." He shook his head. "This land's all I've got. She's stubborn, but she's mine." She bit her lip, fighting the sting in her eyes. "Then I'll never forget you, Mr. Turner." He touched the brim of his hat. "Take care, Miss Mills." They rode opposite directions at sunrise. She and Daniel toward the north road, Eli back toward Red Mesa. By the time the sun cleared the canyon, they were only 2 small figures, swallowed by distance. Weeks passed. Summer deepened, and the valley turned bronze. Eli tried to lose himself in work, but every quiet evening brought back the sound of her laughter, the way she'd looked at his land as if seeing beauty he'd forgotten. One late afternoon, as he repaired the windmill, the dog barked toward the road. Eli looked up and froze. A wagon approached, creaking under a load of lumber. On the seat sat Daniel Mills, reins in hand. Beside him, her bonnet tipped back in the breeze, sat Clara. She waved. "You didn't think we'd leave you to all this emptiness, did you?" Eli climbed down slowly, disbelief softening into a smile. "Thought you were heading north." "We were," Daniel said, jumping down. "But a letter from Silverton said they don't need more hands. So we figured Red Mesa might." Clara stepped forward. "If you'll have us." For a long moment Eli just looked at her, at the healed scar on her leg, at the light in her eyes. Then he nodded. "Reckon there's always room for more help." Her answering smile was all the sunlight the valley needed. That night, as the sky burned orange behind the cliffs, Clara stood on the porch watching the wind chase dust across the plain. Eli joined her, coffee mug in hand. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "Used to," he said, "but not lately." She turned to him, voice barely above the whispering wind. "I think some places are meant for healing. Some people, too." He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them, gratitude, affection, a quiet promise that didn't need words. He tipped his hat back. "You're not just company anymore, Clara." She smiled. "I know." The wind swept through the valley again, softer this time, carrying the scent of rain and the first notes of peace either of them had known in years. And as darkness settled over Red Mesa Ranch, 2 weary hearts, once lost in dust and distance, finally found home, not in the land, but in each other.